The Age of Revolution, the American Revolutionary War. Hello, I'm your host. I'll be talking about the American Revolutionary War, what led to it, and what was the aftermath. Our story begins at the turn of the 18th century. Britain and France had become the dominant powers in Europe, as well as the dominant powers competing for colonial possessions across the world in North America, India, Asia. Because of their rivalry during the 7 Years' War in the 18th century, they would join opposite sides. In the Treaty of Westminster on January 1756, Frederick the Great would form an alliance with Britain. Britain formed the alliance to protect the holding of the king, which was Hanover. Of the major European powers, the main alliances would be Britain, Prussia, and Hanover, and on the other side would be France, Austria, Sweden, Saxony, and Russia. Here in the United States, it is known as the French-Indian War. Britain at first would suffer many setbacks. Hanover would be knocked out of the war. As well, Britain would suffer many defeats in North America, such as the Battle of Fort Bull on March 27, 1756. But fortunes would change, and Hanover would re-enter the war, and with help from Prussian forces help push French forces west. And in North America, France would lose many strategic positions, and in 1759, Quebec City would fall to the British. The 7 Years' War, the French-Indian War, would end with the Treaty of Paris of 1763. Britain would gain the most territorially in North America, as well gained a stronger foothold in India. And their ally Prussia would survive attacks from all sides, from the French, Austrians, Russians, and Sweden. Why did I mention the 7 Years' War when talking about the American Revolutionary War? Even though Great Britain gained major territories, it would be drowned in debt, and the way it could pay off the debt was to raise new taxes, and new taxes would be raised on the 13 colonies. The new taxes implemented in the 13 colonies to pay for the war were ones people in mainland Britain were paying for, but there was one major difference, which was the 13 colonies were not represented in the parliament. A famous phrase during this period would be, no taxes without representation. But the colonists were not only angry at the new taxes, but were also angry that the British were preventing them from expanding west, since the western territories were held to be reservations for Native Americans. So in short, the two major reasons for the American Revolutionary War were no taxes without representation, as well the British government preventing colonists from expanding west. King George III would repeal some of the taxes, but others he would not budge on. But on July 5th, 1775, the Continental Congress of the 13 colonies would send the king a letter called the Oliver Branch Petition. The petition will emphasize their loyalty to the British Crown and emphasize their rights as British citizens. This attempt would fail, as the king would ignore the letter and send troops to the colony. Tensions between the Crown and the colonists were already high. On March 5th, 1770, Crispus Attucks would be considered the first American casualty in the American Revolutionary War. He died in the Boston Massacre on March 5th, 1770. But the final nail to the coffin that would ignite the war would be when the British troops were sent to seize weapons, but instead would engage with colonial militia at Lexington and Concord in 1775. Britain had strong support in the southern colonies, but throughout the war would fail to take advantage of it. And when the British created a plan to divide the colonies in two, it would fail. The northern offensive was checked by the colonies, and the southern offensive would not begin because of the general who decided to instead march on the capital of the colonies, which at the time was Philadelphia. At this point, the French and Spanish governments were supporting the colonies and would not enter the war until they could see that the colonists could win against the British. So in 1777, the colonies would show their determination and ability to win at the Battle of Saratoga. In June 1778, France would openly enter the conflict, and with them came an important asset to the war, the French fleet. French and Spanish entry into the war would stretch the British even further. The importance of the French fleet would be seen at Yorktown, when the French fleet would prevent reinforcements or evacuation of the British forces. Cornwallis would be forced to surrender on October 19, 1781 at Yorktown. British removal of troops from Charleston and Savannah in late 1782 would mark the end of the conflict. Britain had the resources to win in a war of attrition, but public support in mainland Britain would decline over the years, and French and Spanish entry into the war would stretch him even further, and eventually would cut their losses and sue for peace. In the Treaty of Paris of 1783, Britain would recognize the independence of the 13 colonies and would give the colonies some land west of the Appalachian mountain range. Now to talk about the aftermath of the American Revolutionary War. Britain would not suffer a major setback, as they had other colonies which could support them economically. But France and Spain were suffering a lot economically, and it would put more pressure on their citizens as well as their colonies. In France, the third estate would be put under greater pressure, which would be one of the causes of the French Revolution and the rise of Napoleon. Napoleon would dominate Europe for about a decade. During his reign, he would invade Spain in what is now known as the Peninsular War. Spain would be put under great pressure militarily and economically. Spain would put more pressure on their colonies, which was a major reason for revolutions across their colonies or revolts. It is interesting to see that the American Revolutionary War would lead to such turmoil in Europe as well in the Americas. In Europe, France would dominate. In the Americas, the colonies would, over the 19th century, gain their independence because of the turmoil in Europe. To sum everything up, the 7-Year War will leave Britain with large debt, which meant they had to raise new taxes on their colonies, and the new territories gained would not be permitted for colonists to expand west. The anger of the colonists for those two major reasons would lead to the American Revolutionary War, in which France and Spain would support the colonists but would leave their economies in turmoil, which would lead to the French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars. And later in the 19th century, the independence of Spanish colonies in the Americas, such as Mexico, Peru, Gran Colombia.